Welcome to Cultimatum, the podcast that delves deep into the culture of complexities of cults and human trafficking. I'm your host, Anonymous Andrew. Each week, we explore different facets of cult life and human trafficking, from the psychological manipulation to the brave stories of those who have escaped.
Hello, everyone. I'm Melody. I'm Andrew's co-host. Having experienced the depth of a cult firsthand, specifically the House of Yahweh, I'm here as an advocate for fellow survivors. My journey has inspired me to help others who find themselves in similar situations. This podcast is committed to respecting our guests' privacy. To ensure their comfort and safety, we offer them the option to remain anonymous.
Additionally, we would like to include a disclaimer. The views and opinions expressed by our hosts and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Cultimatum or its affiliates. Cultimatum is not responsible and does not verify for accuracy any of the information shared by our hosts and guests. The content discussed on this podcast is based on personal experiences, opinions, and speculation, and should not be construed as professional services or advice. Neither the host nor the guest are assuming liability for any misuse or reliance on the information presented. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and listeners are encouraged to conduct their own research and seek professional advice where appropriate.
Before we dive into today's episode, we want to issue a trigger warning. Some episodes may explore explicit and potentially disturbing topics such as sexual abuse, rape, human trafficking, suicide, and other sensitive subjects. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello and welcome to Cultimatum, the culture of cults. My name is Anonymous Andrew, and with me is Melody. Good afternoon, Melody.
Hi, Andrew. We have another cult that we have not covered yet, so
Yay.
That's always exciting. Exactly, always exciting for the show. I found our guest Heidi on TikTok. I'm going to give a little bit of history of Seventh-day Adventist, but Heidi's got a lot more in-depth information about it. Seventh-day Adventist was started by William Miller in the 1830s and 40s. It was called the Millerite Movement, or the Second Great Awakening. The Seventh-day Adventist Church, formerly by that name, was established in Battle Creek, Michigan in 1863, and Heidi has some direct roots to that particular establishment. So Heidi, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really good to be here with you guys this afternoon.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
And what's with Michigan? I keep hearing cults coming up in Michigan. They all start there, and like Twin Flames is in Michigan, and
yes,
this has got to be
Michigan.
5 cults that I'm hearing. They're all based in Michigan
and Texas. Texas and Michigan. I don't know.
And Texas. Oh, yes, Texas too. Right.
That's interesting. I hadn't heard that many others came out of Michigan too.
I'm hearing a lot. I have this obsession with the Twin Flames. Of course, they're based in Michigan. It's just ironic that he picked that state, but I think he has roots there too. So
yes.
Anyway, Melody, take it from here.
Well, Heidi, we're just going to let you go ahead and start. We usually just start wherever you want. I mean, it sounds like you've got deep roots within the organization. So go ahead and start. And then as we have questions, we'll go ahead and ask them. So feel free to start wherever you want to.
Okay. So like you said, the church was founded in the Millerite movement. Like you said, though, you said that it was started really from William Miller. I disagree a little bit with that. William Miller had his Millerite movement, and the Seventh-day Adventist Church sprung out of the Millerite movement, but William Miller did not I don't believe William Miller became a Seventh-day Adventist or was a Seventh-day Adventist himself. I could be wrong on that.
Okay, so it's more of an offshoot then.
It is an offshoot.
Okay.
From my understanding, my history, my research, that the Seventh-day Adventist Church is an offshoot from
I am sure you know more than I do. We're going to go with that.
Yeah, it's been my life history to have to know this. So my great-great-great-grandmother on my father's side Her name was Ellen G. White, and she was at Ascension Rock on October 20th, 1844. We call that day the Great Disappointment. It was one of the last days that William Miller said that would be the day that Jesus Christ would return and all of the saints would rise up and meet him in the clouds of glory and be returned to heaven. So they were really in their white robes and they were at this rock and they waited and they fully believed and were disappointed. So Ellen White, again, she was only about 17 at the time. And I know had a big history with brain damage, and she worked for her father, who was a hatter with mercury. I believe she had mercury poisoning, but she began having these visions to explain why everybody was so disappointed that William Miller had the date right, but the event wrong. So her vision helped give hope to the people that were greatly disappointed that they weren't wrong, that William Miller just had the event wrong. This first vision was very detailed. Everything about Ellen White is all detailed. There's writings. You can find it online, books galore. She is one of the, I think she actually is the most prolific woman author in America.
Heidi.
Yes.
You say great, I think 3 great grandmothers. What year we're talking? Like 1600s, 1700s?
Oh, 1800s.
1800s. Okay.
So the Great Disappointment was in 1844. And like I said, Ellen White was about 17 at the time.
Sounds like she was gaslighting.
I can't remember exactly what that puts her.
That's exactly what I was just going to say.
She was deflecting from the fact that the prophecy did not come true.
Which is what they have to do, because if they have a prophecy which over the years we've seen all these prophets, these doomsday cults, when they say the end of the world's going to be and whatever, and it doesn't happen, they gaslight you. So
exactly. Well, and Ellen White's gaslighting came with, I have visions from God. Like, these are, not just my words, these are God's words, but you're right. Absolutely gaslighting.
Yeah.
Her vision was a very interesting one. And the way that everything went, it's very interesting because the church likes to forget about this part, like the early church history, because it became very problematic. Ellen White said that, let me get this right, that on October 20th, 1844, Jesus went into the most holy place in heaven, that there's a temple in heaven, just like there was a temple here on earth. That temple here on earth was just a mirror of the temple in heaven. And on that day, Jesus went into the most holy place to judge all of humanity. And then we called it the closed door theology, that Jesus had closed the door to salvation, and now judgment was taking place in heaven. And so it was very problematic for, converting people to the church, because if you believe that Jesus has gone into the most holy place, closed the door, he's judging, then what's the point in converting anyone to your religion? Because if you didn't believe it before October 20, 1844, now you're shut out from salvation. And that closed door theology held in place for about 10 years. Because I think you said, like, even that the Seventh-day Adventist Church began in, what did you write down there? 1860 something?
The Seventh-day Adventist was 1863. That's what I found on Google.
Right.
So
1863. So there was about almost 20 years between when that Great Disappointment happened, Ellen White's visions, and the church forming before it officially became the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And she was prophesying and having all these prophecies in between 1844 and the founding of the church, and then beyond. She lived until 1915 and died, still having visions and writing till almost her last day. So, I think maybe not her last day, but pretty close. Like, she was, right. She worked for her entire career prophesying and changing her prophecies and changing things when, she didn't get things right. So, like, the closed door theology became problematic, and they had to kind of shift and hide, that early part, because they were so wrong.
Right.
Again, right. You can't convert anyone to your church if you've told them that there's no hope for them if they didn't believe before the date that William Miller had set for Jesus to come.
Which I always find it ironic how
but
these groups try to claim to be the one true truth, but yet they keep changing their teachings. So what is the truth when you keep changing the teachings to fit your narrative at that moment, and they just keep doing it? Yeah,
exactly.
it's kind
right.
of
And it's
nuts.
so hard. It's so frustrating now because it seems so obvious, all the gaslighting, all the changing. And I, got on TikTok and I was like, look, here's all the prophecies that she said that she got wrong. And people are like, no, they can't see it. It's so hard that, it seems so
Yes,
obvious to me now, but it wasn't obvious
right,
to me growing up too. I mean, that's the hard
right.
part. That's what
You've
I
been
feel
there.
makes it I've been there.
Yes,
Like, right. I
yes.
was brainwashed into this from birth. And so I have so much empathy for people that are still a part of the church because I understand like the culture of the church, the community that's created, the beliefs around it. Like it becomes your everything.
Yeah.
And Ellen White made sure, I think she fully understood, and the people and the men around her fully understood what they were doing to create a world within a world. And they were very clear about that. The Seventh-day Adventist Church was set apart. They are the remnant church. That's one of Ellen White's main prophecies, was that here are these messages to the remnant church, the Latter-day Saints. It's funny because we're not the Latter-day Saints, but it's not the Mormon church, but it's very similar, grew out about the same time, and had a lot of similar messaging to the people that, they have this peculiar message that's meant for the whole world, but it's given to them to help spread to the entire world. And here's, how to spread that message. So Ellen White wrote again, like obsessively. She would wake up at about maybe 3 a.m, earlier sometimes, and just write. According to her, she'd be woken up by God or an angel. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I just had a quick question about what can you explain a little bit more about why you think she had mercury poisoning and what are some of the symptoms of that? Because I'm not familiar with what mercury poisoning does to somebody.
Oh, that's a great question. I didn't prepare anything for this. So I'm like, I have it on one of my TikToks when I did all of my research and I put it up there. But mercury, so why I believe she had mercury poisoning. Her father was a hatter. He made hats out of their home for at least 10 years or more. It was his main business. And when Ellen White was in 3rd grade, she apparently was a bit of a bully. Like the story was always like told to me that she was bullied by this girl, but I think she was really mean, had done something to a girl that the girl retaliated by throwing a rock in her face. And that, I think, nearly killed her. I don't know if it nearly killed her, gave her, put her made her unconscious at least. And she was bedridden for a long time, didn't go back to school. She only had a 3rd grade education formally.
Wow.
And then after that incident where she was hit by the rock, she was then kept at home, and her education continued there while working for her father. And she very much was a part of the mercury getting worked into the hats. And I can't imagine her not having mercury poisoning with the amount of contact that she had with mercury in the hatting business and in her home. So that's why I say that she had mercury poisoning, because I just can't comprehend her not having it. Would you mind if I looked up, if you want me to tell
I'm
you?
doing it right now.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I'm going to assume, I mean, this is a little bit off topic, but not totally. Is this where the term Mad Hatter comes from? I did not
Absolutely,
realize.
yes.
Okay, so I did not realize
Mad
that
Hatter
hatters
comes
were
from-
prone to mercury poisoning, but I'm thinking the term Mad Hatter, and I'm like, I wonder if that's where that came from. Interesting. Yeah, I had no idea. Yeah.
Bingo.
I'm just putting 2 and 2 together here.
I'm glad you picked up on that. Yeah, there's a lot of symptoms. And there's charts that you can find online. I found it in my deconstruction. And when I was looking at all of Ellen White's symptoms and the mercury poisoning, it was very clear. There's huge overlap.
Okay, so here's what I found for children. If children are exposed to mercury, they have impaired motor skills, problems thinking and speaking, issues with hand-eye coordination, and being unaware of surroundings. Now, that's as a child. Adults have muscle weakness, metallic taste in their mouth. Gee, that's not surprising. Nauseous, vomiting, lack of motor skills, changes in vision, hearing, or speech, and difficulty breathing. And then overall, they say anxiety, mood swings, depression, numbness, memory problems, and physical tremors.
Yep.
Interesting.
So this woman, her dad made hats. I'm going to check Melody's question about Mad Hatter. I'll find out if that's indeed where that came from.
Yeah,
So,
definitely that.
So she was homeschooled after third grade, and I'm guessing that she lived with her father, and that's where she was exposed to mercury. Are you indicating that her mercury exposure made her a little nuts?
I am absolutely saying I believe that her mercury poisoning had a huge impact on her everything. I mean, her persona, her anxiety, her predilection towards. Well, also it's interesting because it's not just mercury poisoning. It's both the mercury poisoning and the brain injury. Her brain injury is very specific. The way that it damaged her brain, there's a specific syndrome. And again, I put this on one of my TikToks. I did all the research and put it out there. And it's available online if you want to research that and find what it is, the name of it, and all the symptoms. When I did my research and I found out the fact that this specific brain injury to her brain creates hypergraphia, like this obsession to write everything. It creates hyper spirituality, where you have this obsession with spirituality. And she had both of those. And then more. There was many more than just those two, but those two struck out at me because she was so obsessive with her writing, and she was so obsessive with her spirituality, and believed that all of her visions and everything came directly from God.
Okay, the term Mad Hatter originates from the phrase "mad as a hatter," which is used to describe someone who appears irrational or eccentric. The expression is closely linked to the hat-making industry of the 18th century, where mercury was commonly used in the production of felt hats. And it was also called the Mad Hatter's disease. And it created mood swings, irritability, and hallucinations.
Yeah.
And it goes on. And then they talk about the first time it was used in Alice in Wonderland in 1865. So, so it does make sense that this woman was exposed to a lot of mercury, and she probably had this Mad Hatter disease.
And I just want to clarify, because I'm this is what I'm understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong. So I am understanding that Ellen White, who was your great grandmother, was the main prophet of the Seventh-day Adventist offshoot, correct? Okay. So she is the main prophet. That is correct.
Yes.
Okay.
Question to both ladies, because you're both cult educated and experienced, and I'm not as. Is this uncommon for a woman prophet to be running a? Yeah.
Oh, I was especially back in that time period. Yeah.
Yeah, because all I've been hearing for the entire podcast is all these men running these religious organizations, and the women had to be not seen or not heard, or they were, they couldn't wear these. Here's one now. You're talking about. This woman starts this cult or organization. Interesting.
Yeah, it is. And it's a very interesting history, because currently the church is fighting over women's ordination. And I find it so hilarious that a church that was founded on a women prophets visions writing said, okay, we can listen to this woman, and she can preach and she can teach and she can guide us, but no other woman can get up in front and be ordained and be an ordained pastor. They do let women now preach, but and some conferences do ordain, but there's this big battle within the church worldwide. There's a lot of toxic misogyny, patriarchy in the United States. Oh, it's still there for sure. But in the United States, it's much more where they're trying to be in line with, the current culture, and accepting women as ministers is part of the current culture. And if they've realized, I think, as a church, that they need to accept women if they're going to be relevant and continue to grow here in this space. But because they're a worldwide church, and they have this structure and organization where they have a top down, it's one of the most highly structured Christian denominations, because they have this hierarchy of a world church, and then they have these divisions, these worldwide divisions. We have the North American division, the European division, mostly it kind of goes with continents, but not necessarily. It does get split up in certain places that are pretty large. But the countries and the divisions that are not a part, European Union and the North American division seems to be the ones that are trying to be more progressive. And the other divisions are going, no. Those are the divisions where they have their culture hasn't accepted women in other roles. So they're really forcing the rest of the world to follow that belief that women cannot be ordained. It's splitting the church right now. It's very interesting to watch. And again, like you said, it's so interesting because the church was founded by a woman, that we're here having this battle that could potentially split the church apart.
So let's go back to 1864 or 1844.
Mm-hmm.
Your great grandmother. So after being hit on the head with a rock and after ingesting mercury, we're guessing for many years, at what age did she become this prophet? Was it something in her teenage years? And when did she because you're here, you're an offspring of hers. When did she get married, and who did she marry? I would imagine you have all of that.
I do, yes. So like I said, she began her prophecy career essentially right after that great disappointment of October 20th, 1844. She had her first vision in a meeting afterwards where everyone was just so depressed, couldn't figure it out. And she had her vision, shared it, and continued to have more and share more. And she soon, I don't have the date on this, but she married James White, and he helped her with her writings and getting them published, and getting the word out. They were very much partners for creating this church together. And it wasn't just him. I mean, there were a lot of other men that are founders of the Seventh-day Adventist Church as well. It was certainly not just Ellen White, but they did take Ellen White's visions and guidance and their beliefs and merge it all together. There was a lot of fighting too about, the seventh day being worshipped in the beginning. That was a point of contention for a while. And I believe it's because of Ellen White's visions and because of her writings that they were convinced to worship on the seventh day.
What was the original vision that she had, and was there already a church built around her? Did she have parishioners, followers?
No, she didn't have any followers at first until after the great disappointment. And then she began once she started sharing her visions, then she started having people believe her and follow her and support her. Honestly, I should have sat down and done the research. I wasn't thinking that all of this conversation would be centered around the history, and the background here.
You're really on here to tell us about your involvement in the cult.
Yes.
I'm just fascinated that in 1860 or even earlier, that this woman was able to get something like this off the ground started. And
yeah. And she was definitely supported by the men around her. I mean, I think the great disappointment, it had such an impact on the psyche of these men. They were grasping at straws to try to find a reason why, that they weren't wrong, and Ellen White gave them that hope of, we weren't fully wrong. We got the date right, but the event wrong. And Ellen White's guidance and teachings helped them to feel validated in all of their beliefs of what had happened, that there was a significant thing that happened on that date. And you'll have a Seventh-day Adventist that fully believe that there was something really important that did happen on that date.
But
Just
they don't know what it is.
Well, again, did the recording of this, because Melody and I had a brief conversation before you came on about the closed door theology. Did we talk
that's
about
not
that too?
recorded.
Anthony?
No, yeah, you
No.
can go ahead and go into that. That was not recorded. Go ahead.
Yeah. So that first vision that Ellen White had was giving hope to that group of people that were so disappointed at Ascension Rock. Her vision basically said, and I'm boiling this all down, I'm sure a
Right.
lot more, but essentially her vision said, we got the date right, but the event wrong. The event that was actually happening was Jesus was going into the most holy place in the holy temple in heaven, because there's a temple in heaven, just like there was a temple in the Bible, and not just in the Bible,
Right.
but in the Old Testament, it describes the temple that Moses had his people built. And you had those sections in the temple where, the most holy place was the place that only a priest, when they're sanctified, could go into, right?
Right.
So that was shown to Ellen White in her vision. She said that there was the same temple in heaven, and Jesus was going into that most holy place to begin the final judgment of all of humanity, and close the door behind him. That meant that they had this closed door theology where nobody after that date would be able to be saved, because Jesus was now doing the judgment. And then he would be coming again. And it was still, again, it's okay, it's coming soon, but he's looking through the book of life, and he's judging all of humanity, and he's doing all of this for us so that we can know that he's looked through and really taken his time to carefully judge every person rightfully. And that closed door theology became very problematic for the growing of this church, which they were trying to grow. Because at the beginning, they didn't care about growing a church. That wasn't the point. The point was to protect their ego. I mean, that's how I see it now. To protect their ego of, we got it wrong. Oh, okay, this didn't happen.
To explain the false prophecy.
But exactly.
What was supposed to happen on that day? They went to this rock. What were they supposed to see?
They were dressed in white. They were supposed to see Jesus coming out of the clouds, and they were supposed to and meet him in the clouds of glory and be returned to heaven. That was the second coming. They were convinced that the second coming was and it wasn't because William Miller was a prophet. William Miller was a biblical scholar, and he studied Daniel and Revelation, and he put together timelines and all of these charts to prove that from the Bible that he could say with utmost certainty that because of his studies in the Bible, that he'd figured out the date for Jesus' second coming, which again is so ridiculous, because Jesus also says, no one will know the date or the time of my return. If you study and believe the Bible, that alone is hypocritical, because you know that Jesus says very specifically, no one will know, yet they spent all this time to try to prove and know when that would happen.
So Heidi, let's jump ahead into your personal experience with being Seventh-day Adventist, growing up Seventh-day Adventist. What was that like for you? What was your childhood like?
Very chaotic. I probably it was a terrible childhood. Also, so I'll explain my personal history a little bit. I was born to John Odell and Karen Scholl. Married, my father became Odell. My father was the only son of Daphne Odell and Robert Odell, or Daphne White. Daphne, my grandmother, was the direct descendant of Ellen White. Her father was a Henry White, who was William White's oldest twin. So he was a twin son. So Ellen White had 5 children. Only one of them had children. That was Willie White, or William White. William White had 2 marriages. His second marriage, he had twins with his second wife, and that's my great-grandfather. Henry White had my grandmother, and then my father. Okay, so my father had mental illness. He struggled with schizophrenia and manic depression, or we call it schizoaffective disorder. Believe the mental illness goes back further than my father. Obviously, I mean, I think it goes back to Ellen White, but that's also
Mm,
also on my father's side. It's my grandfather's side too. So my paternal father, my grandfather, not the descendant of Ellen White, also suffered from like depression and anxiety, and there was
mm,
maybe more than that as well. But suffice it to say, my father did not have great genes for mental health.
right.
They wanted my father to have a normal life. They wanted to hide the mental illness because of the cult. They were held up on a pedestal. You know, they were
Right.
descendants of Ellen White. And I grew up in the same time having this chaos. We were always held up on this pedestal within the church because we were descendants of Ellen White.
Oh,
Ellen White's last home and residence is called Elmshaven. It's a home here in St. Helena, California, where I still currently live, or I live near to it. I don't actually live in St. Helena, but I live near enough to it. I could go and visit it if I want to. I don't necessarily want to, but I have. That's where she died. And
mm,
that's where I partially grew up because it became a historical landmark. And my grandparents became caretakers of the home. They lived in a separate home at the back of the property that was the offices for Ellen White. There was another water tower that became a residence for another caregiver. They shared duties with another family. And I ended up living there when I was in middle school for about a year because my neither parent could care for me. So let me back up. Sorry, this is a lot.
oh, that's
I'm
okay.
not triggered. It's just there's so much. I don't know where to start sometimes when I talk about all of this. I believe that my grandparents tried to find a spouse for my father to save him, to get him to have a normal life, to hide the fact that he had all these struggles with mental illness because it looked very badly on the family to
Right.
have someone that had such bad mental health struggles. So my grandfather was a pastor of a Seventh-day Adventist church where he met my mother. Not my grandfather met my mother, where my father met my mother because his father was the pastor of my mother's church. That's how they met. And my mother, when she was 13, was thrown off of a horse. She was dared to ride an unbroken horse by one of her friends. Went home, told her family. My grandfather said, "Okay, don't be a coward. Like, do it." You know, she wanted protection from her family, and my grandfather essentially said, "Well, take the dare. Don't be a coward." So she did, rode the horse, got bucked off, hit her head on a rock, but was nearly killed in a coma for about 6 weeks. In order to save her life, they had to remove her left temporal lobe. So that was when she was 13. So she was spent 5 years recovering from that, learning how to walk, talk, learn life again. She was also deeply abused by my grandfather and spent most of her life believing
Mm,
that he was trying to kill her. So she quite literally ran from the frying pan into the fire. From my grandfather's house, well, my grandmother was still there too, but my grandfather ran the house. She literally he was abusing her, he was chasing her around. She felt like she was gonna die and left, went and found my father, who she had maybe met only a couple months before, and was like, "Let's go on a date." I'm ready. I think he had tried to pursue her, and she was like, "Yes, okay." Like, so she ran to his arms, and they got married very quickly. She was very young when they got married. I believe only about 21 at the time when they got married. They met when she was 20, married at 21, and then had my sister right away the next year. She also did not know that my father had any mental illness. Okay.
mm,
She had
right.
heard rumors that he had suffered from mental illness and asked him. He denied, of course, and asked his sisters and my grandparents, and every one of them lied to my mother and said, "No, there's no problems." So actually, then my parents divorced, and she was able to achieve an annulment from this marriage. The judge, because of her testimony and everything, basically, I'm a bastard child, and so is my sister, because the marriage was invalid because my
Wow.
family lied to my mother to convince her to marry my father to have a normal family life and save everyone, him, the family's name, whatever. And in fact,
Right.
just created mass chaos for us. Neither one of my parents could care for us fully. I mean, my father had about, I think I had about 5 quasi-normal years, what I thought were normal. I look back, nothing about it was normal. Everything about it was awful. There was lots of abuse, and then gaslit into believing that it wasn't abuse, of course.
Mm.
And then my parents split after my father was taking medication. He was able to do a lot, actually, once he started taking lithium when he was about 26, I think. And it gave him quite a few good years. He was able to pass the bar. He became a lawyer. He set up his own private
Wow.
practice. And we, had a nice home in the suburbans of LA, greater LA area. But, he didn't take the medication properly. He started missing it, taking 3 or 5 days at a row at a time, told a doctor about it. And the doctor told him, hey, if you keep doing this, you're going to kill yourself. He took that to mean I can't take any medication ever again, went cold turkey off of his medication. And then it created mass chaos. Lots of trauma, lots of horrible things that I experienced when that happened, starting around 5, 6 years old. Then my mother left him and she was able to get sole custody. And my father became homeless for about 13 years of my childhood. And my mother, even though she got sole custody, really couldn't care for me either. So it was very interesting because I grew up in a very fractured, chaotic environment where I was also raised by not just my parents, but the cult of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I spent time in so many different SDA homes because neither one of my parents could give me that support. So lived with my grandparents and my mom for a while, then that was too much. Moved in with some of my aunts and uncles for 6 months, came back with my mom for a while, then dropped off at another aunt and uncle's house, then my grandparents. By the time I was in middle school, I was living at Elmshaven with my grandparents, and I was there for about a year and experienced what it was like really at the heart of the Seventh-day Adventist cult. I was taught and trained how to give tours of Elmshaven. I knew all of the apologetics of everything for the church. And I did. I was very proud of the fact that this was my heritage. This was my family because, we got so much praise and so much accolades and so much. It was one of the ways I got love and attention was, oh, we're related to Ellen White. And in my Seventh-day Adventist communities, that was a huge deal. People would come from all over the world. They would take pictures with us. I would get pet. I would get kissed. I would get told, oh, it's like I'm touching God, touching you. It was disgusting and weird and gross. Yeah. But at the time when I was living with my grandparents, I was beginning to have memories come up of more abuse that my father had done when I was a young child. And I began to share it with friends. And my friend said, well, you need to get help. You need to tell your grandparents, you need help. And I did. I didn't sit them down. We had family worships, I don't know if, Melody, when you grew up, if you had nightly worships with your family, but that was what it was like living with my grandparents when they raised me. It was every night we'd have family worship. We'd come together, have a passage from the Bible or read something, have a message, pray, and maybe have a brief little worship talk from my grandfather. So at one of those family meetings or family worships, I decided to work up the courage to ask for help from God and from the family or whatever. I think I knew I needed to couch it in a way that I was asking for help with this and saying, here's what I believe my father has done to me. Here's what I'm now remembering. It's coming up. And they said I was a liar. Of course, you can't say that about our son. Our son would never do that. There's also history there, a lot more history there with, my mom believed that my father was abusing me sexually when the divorce occurred and tried to prove it, couldn't prove it. And at that time, I didn't remember that happening, or I denied it when I was about 6, 7, 8, up until all the memories started coming out when I was living with them when I was 12/13, 12 and 13.
Heidi, your mom believed you.
Yes. Well, my mom believed me. My sister had said things to my grandmother, said, oh, Dad's coming into Heidi's bed every night and touching and kissing her. And so my grandma believed her, my mom believed me. I was also shamed from a toddler for being hypersexual. And now as an adult looking back, I can't comprehend blaming and shaming a toddler for being hypersexual and not seeing that as a symptom of abuse.
Right.
Right.
Because toddlers just aren't hypersexual.
Sorry to ask this, but was your sister also a victim?
I fully believe so, yes. And so also, I'll be fully real, I remembered my sister doing things to me. She was 4 years older than me, and I remembered her taking me under the bed and touching me and kissing me. And I fully believe that the abuse started with my sister, and it came to me as well. But I think she was the first one. And then I've known now, I mean, she's told people that have told me that she was jealous of me when the attention turned from her to me.
Right.
And her telling my grandma wasn't really to protect me, but to get, it to stop, for it to get back to her. And she has so much trauma from it. I mean, her trauma, I mean, like, I don't blame her. I'm not trying to blame her. She was fully abused and victimized. And as a child, took that and abused me. She also suffers from extreme mental illness, schizo. I mean, the diagnoses have always been so difficult, but there's been multiple types of diagnoses that we've gotten over the years. But my father's mental illness and my sister's mental illness, it's really interesting. Both began while living at a Seventh-day Adventist boarding school. So my father had a break from reality, I guess, or had to be hospitalized for his mental illness while he was at Monterey Bay Academy working. He was like working in the strawberry fields. There was all this pressure to work, go to school, work. No break, no addressing any of the trauma, which I know my father experienced. I mean, my grandparents were abusive. It's been really hard. Like only this year where I've been able to really say, no, my grandparents were abusers, because they were venerated. I mean, they are still venerated in the rest of my family. Me coming on here and saying Robert Odell and Daphne Odell were abusers is going to make the rest of my family never speak to me again. Not that I care, because they don't anyways anymore, most of them. And if they do, I mean, I would obviously love a relationship with them, but it's not to the point that I have to deny my experiences, my reality, and who I am, right? Which I've had to do in order to have a relationship with my family my entire life. Because going back to that time when I was 13 and living with my grandparents and telling them, here's what I'm remembering, here's what I'm experiencing, help. They said, no, you're a liar. And you're just trying to get attention. You're trying to be this victim celebrity, and you can't live with us anymore. They kicked me out and ostracized me from the family. I mean,
This was age 13
barred from coming to. Yeah, I was 13
when you were kicked out
at the time.
Oh gosh.
I was kicked out of their home. And
So where did you go?
I was told that they took me back to my mom's house. And, my mom was very happy at the time that I was remembering and knowing what she had been saying and knowing all along. So it was this point of, well, before I left, I mean, she kicked me out of the house when I was in 6th grade for not cleaning my room. I'm sure I talked back, and I was a kid. I'm not going to say I was perfect or, that I didn't do something wrong. I know that I was belligerent. I know that I refused to clean my room. But she told me that made me not worthy of being able to live in her home. And she had plenty of people that she could move in, and did. There was a friend of hers that was a single mom, foster mom, single woman with 4 foster children with high needs. And she moved them into my room immediately after she dropped me off at my grandparents' house at Elmshaven when I was in 6th grade.
Which I'm sure they were abused too, I would imagine.
100%. Absolutely.
4 children are moved in to the same environment. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and so.
Those children, there's a whole other story. We don't probably have time for that.
I'm trying to connect the dots here. So your grandfather, he was part of the Seventh-day Adventist.
Your father was.
Yes, all of my family.
Ellen White then would have been your dad's great grandmother, correct?
So,
or 2 greats.
Great.
2 greats. Great.
Okay. So My grandfather was not a descendant of Ellen White. So it was my father's mother,
Okay.
father's mother is Ellen
Mother.
White. So there's like 5
Okay.
generations. Ellen
Okay.
White, Willie White, Henry White, Daphne White, John Odell, my father, and then me.
Okay. Okay.
And your grandfather was an elder in this church?
Yes, my grandfather was a Seventh-day Adventist pastor. He converted to Seventh-day Adventist after serving in World War II. He had one of those life brushes with death. His truck was exploded or hit a mine, and he had friends die right next to him. He went back to his foxhole. I mean, he had shrapnel down to his underclothes as he was getting undressed, but he didn't die. So he felt like, there was this divine protection. And then there was this Seventh-day Adventist soldier in a bunker with him who began giving him Bible studies and converted him to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So after he left the war, he moved to, I think he was like stationed near Loma Linda University down in Southern California, or he was attending Loma Linda University. So they were down in that area when he met my grandmother. And she was going to school, becoming a nurse. Also, obviously a huge part of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, being a very close descendant of Ellen White at the time. And she fell in love with the back of my grandfather's head, and that was it. Like, she put her hooks into my grandfather, and she got what she
Pursued him.
wanted. My grandma always did. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Are they still alive?
No,
No.
both of them passed away.
How about your parents?
Both of my parents also passed away. My
Okay.
mother most recently, I lost her last October 7, 2023.
Oh, gosh.
That's a whole story. I lost my father. He passed away on December 13, 2013. It was very interesting. Numerology, the date, 1313, choked on an orange and died. It was very sudden.
Wow.
He was at a care home. We'd gotten him into some care homes. Actually, I took my father in as a very young adult. When I was about 24 myself, I had a newborn, and my father had been living in Texas. A very interesting story. So, my dad was homeless up until I was about 18. And then he met a woman who needed a green card. And he went on Christian Mingle and found a woman who needed a green card. They never actually got married, but she did move him out. She gave him a ticket to come and live with her, and they were going to get married. That was the plan. But I think that she realized, actually, I know that she realized once he got out there just how bad his mental health was, and in no good conscience could she actually marry him, and she became his caregiver. So I'm actually very grateful for the fact that he had so many good years where he was in her home being cared for. She had reached her capacity to help him and sent him on a bus one-way ticket back to us. And my grandma, one of my aunts, and my sister all initially tried to care for him at one of my aunt's homes, but all of them, together could not do it. It was too much for their mental health. So we were, as a family, faced with, well, what do we do with my father? And I was at home at the time. I'd got a teaching degree right out of college and taught for a couple of years before starting my family. I mean, I got married in college. Like I was told, get married and start a family. And I wanted to be a good Seventh-day Adventist to keep my family. I worked very hard to earn a place back in my family's life because family has always been so important to me. That was like grilled into me from a child. And I felt like it was my fault. I was in the wrong. I gaslit myself. I believed them that, maybe it was all my fault. And maybe I couldn't believe, maybe it was, false memories that my mother had implanted. Either way, I had to work very hard to forgive my father. And I did. I mean, and that's the thing, like I really fully did. I remember it was this big event for me. I ended up sharing my testimony at my high school where I went with how I, was abused and hurt and all these things, but I was set free from all of the hate and the pain by forgiving my father. And truly at the time, that is my truth. And that was what happened. I let go of my hate and my anger towards him. I really did forgive him. And then because of that, I was able to have a relationship with my extended family, my dad's extended family. And there was a lot of aunts and cousins that I cared about deeply, that I would have done pretty much anything in order to get back into their good graces.
Heidi, where are you today with regards to the Seventh-day Adventist Church? Have you left?
Oh, yes.
That-
So my
about
deconstruction journey began about in 2011. 2011, I started writing a book. It was going to be this great novel series starting with starting with Willie White and his second wife, May Lacey, my great great grandparents. I knew their love story. We did all these big white family reunions, and I actually played May Lacey at a family reunion and knew her story. So I thought, well, great. I can tell the story of the church in this nice little family romance, and I'll tell it through down on the ages, each generation. Kind of like, I don't know if you know the novels, Love Comes Softly series by Jeanette Oak. I wanted to write a series like that for the Seventh-day Adventist Church, telling the history of the church and having this romance that was a true story. And in my research, I went to the world headquarters of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Maryland. I spent 3 days down in their archives. I spent time at Andrews University, which is a main, in near Battle Creek, Michigan. It's in Michigan, not in Battle Creek, but near there. And I spent, actually, the time in Andrews was the most explosive. I found clear evidence that pastors knew that there were, inconsistencies with Ellen White's prophecies, that, she made up prophecies after the fact to get property that she wanted and acquired it for their schools and the church and the system that they were creating. And this pastor was very clear about it. And I read much more, and it was just everything unraveled for me. But I brought it to my husband. He was very angry, didn't want to talk about it. He didn't want his beliefs to be shaken, and I didn't want my marriage to fall apart. So I kind of just internalized everything. It was like, I can't. And, even just looking at the alternate to believing in Ellen White was considered sinful. It was a terrifying time for me to question at this level the validity of Ellen White and her writings.
So you never wrote the book?
Oh, I wrote about the 75,000 words of it. I wrote a big part of it, but I never published it because I got to the point where I couldn't, in good conscience, say any of the things that I wanted to say about her, because I knew that she wasn't a true prophet. I couldn't do any apologetics. So I put that to the side and I started working on other writings. And, my marriage fell apart anyways for other reasons. We got divorced, and I very well could have left the church at that time because I had a lot of doubts and a lot of questions. But I think I felt like I was saved by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I was this, single mom and terrified about how I was going to survive and support my kids, where to go, what to do. I've been praying so hard for something that was right to come up. And I really felt like moving to Napa, which was where my husband and I initially met. We went to Pacific Union College. And I really felt like if we went back there, he had family there, I had family, we had friends. I didn't have support down in LA where we were when we divorced. And a job opportunity came up that I specifically was like, I want first and second grade at this specific school. And then I went on to our Seventh-day Adventist, it's called the NAD, the website where they post jobs for all the different things. So I saw that job. I'm like, oh my goodness, it's an answer to prayer. I applied for the job and everything fell into place. I got the job, and they supported me. I told my boss at the time, I had to. I mean, everything came. It was a very chaotic time for my life, and I had to tell her everything that I was going through, and all of my mistakes, all the things that I had done wrong. Like, I couldn't hide anything from her, and I thought that would just keep me from being able to have the job at all. Just being that as honest as I was with her. But she was like, you know what? I see you. I support you. I think you're a great teacher, and we're going to give you this job. And that felt like divine intervention. It felt like God was like saying, hey, I'm answering your prayers. And that was something that at the time I hadn't experienced something like that in a long time. So it did keep me in the church.
What happened in 2012 that when you left, you said you began to deconstruct?
So I began to deconstruct, and that's when I was researching that book and I began to doubt Ellen White. And so in 2015 is when I divorced and got that job. I didn't actually officially leave the church until 2021. So just about 3 years ago. A huge part of my leaving then was I just saw so many things working for the church. I mean, there was just a huge problem over the years that I felt like, if I felt like I was fighting to try to change from within for a while. I really wanted, because I didn't want to lose all of my people. It was my whole upbringing, my family, my friends, my community, my everything. And leaving it really was the most terrifying concept. I struggled with that deeply for years. I actually became a surrogate in 2018. I started the journey to be a surrogate actually at the end of 2017. And I presented it to my boss, and she was like supportive. But it turned out, even though she was supportive, really the church wasn't, the community wasn't. I got a lot of hate for my actions of becoming a surrogate. And that experience definitely made me pull back and go like, what do I even need this community for if they're going to be so hateful? I thought I was doing something loving and doing the right Christian thing. And how could this be bad? How could this be unchristian? But I was told, my kids would come home and say, my friends are telling me that their parents are saying that this is really unchristian, or that you're being very unchristian, or things like that. And I didn't have to hear it just from them. I heard it straight from parents in meetings that I was put into.
So you left officially in 2021. You are no longer in the church. Have you sought therapy for this tragic life story?
Oh, 1,000%. Yes, I have gone to therapy. Been in talk therapy. I was in talk therapy for years. And my therapy now is kind of different modalities. I think we have to do more somatic healing. I became a yoga teacher to work through like the trauma, like through my body. I've been working through like hypnotherapy, as well as I have another therapist. It's a different modality.
Okay.
But I do have a lot of support in helping me with the trauma of all of it.
So where are you today with all of this?
So I fully disbelieve that the Seventh-day Adventist Church has any kind of truth, or that it is the truth. I think that they're a very dangerous cult that perpetuates harm more than good. And I think that the worldwide church is at its core completely corrupt. And I think that actually Ellen White would agree with me on that. My beliefs have evolved. That's a whole nother thing. And I think we've gone over our time. I mean, I deconstructed completely. I did a lot of deconstruction on TikTok after I left the church. I'm still married to a man who works for the Seventh-day Adventist Church, by the way. So while I have left in my heart and everything, I guess I'm still technically a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church on the books, because you have to write a letter and the board has to approve your departure from the church. And that is a step that when I heard that that's what I had to do, I texted the pastor and I said, please remove me from the books. I don't want to be a member anymore. And he's like, well, you have to do this and this. And I was like, I can't. Like, I just full stop. I don't want a group of men to sit around a table and discuss whether or not I can be removed from the church books. Like, it's so abusive. It's so toxic. It's so gross. It's one of the things that I'm like, this is a cult. If it takes this to leave.
No, you should be able to get up and walk away without.
Yeah,
exactly.
It should be the minute you stop showing up, you decide when you're a member or not, right? I mean,
right. And I'm at this point, I'm like, excommunicate me, man. I don't want to be a part of the church. I will say everything that I need to say publicly about what I've experienced and what I see and the harm that this church is perpetuating. Excommunicate me, man. I know they do it to other people for less. So
maybe this podcast will help.
Maybe it will.
Keeping you on the books is their way of controlling you, or so that is their belief. But obviously they couldn't be more wrong. You seem very much grounded and independent. You are not controllable. That much is evident. And of course, I mean that in a positive way. Heidi, you are right. We have to wrap this up. For somebody listening who might still be in this cult or a similar cult, or they may not think it is a cult, but they are on the fence, what advice could you offer?
Well, first of all, I think that it's important that people leave when it's time for them to. And that they don't, leave because they're shamed out of it, but that they realize it's the right thing for them to do. Because if they're shamed out of it, they might, have more trauma and eventually come back and be hurt more.
Right.
So, it has to come from within. Everything does. So I just hope that anything that I say might resonate with someone and go, oh, I hadn't thought about that, or I didn't know that. That's new information, and make them question and learn and go on that journey of self-discovery for themselves. Because truly it is a thing that needs to come from each individual person, from their experiences. And I'm never going to convince anyone who hasn't the experience that I do, or is fully supported and feels good in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And here's the thing that I know about the church is it can feel really good to be a part of it, because that provides community. I mean, there's so much that I miss about being part of the Seventh-day Adventist Church community. It's everything. Like I think I was telling you before, they created churches, schools. Church, school, and hospitals. So you have Seventh-day Adventist everything. You don't need to go outside of the Seventh-day Adventist world if you don't want to. You can, but I mean, it was made so that it would be this world within a world, and it was safe and protected, and it can feel really good. And I don't discount that need to have community. I think we do a really bad job in the rest of the world to give community to people. I want to create spaces where we can have community and support each other. I think that we need to shift as a society, because the Seventh-day Adventist Church is providing something for people that is not being provided in other spaces the way that we need as people. We need community. We need support. And we're not doing that. So if someone's in the church and they are questioning, but it doesn't feel safe for them to leave, then don't. It's not, right. It doesn't need to happen until it's the right time for them, until they have the support, until they feel like it's the best thing for them to do. So I love every Seventh-day Adventist. I don't hate them. I was one. I will always be a Seventh-day Adventist. I want to help people that are in it to think differently, maybe to start questioning and to doing research that they might not have because they've been told that they can't, that it's sinful too. But I think the truth is that when we deny our own self, this is not just the Seventh-day Adventist Church, but I think it's one of the biggest lies of the Christian cult, is that we can't know the truth by going within. And I think that God does reside within each one of us. And I think the name God can be hard for people. It's like a rose by any other name can smell as sweet. You call it source or God or the divine or whatever name you want to give to that higher power. It resides within us. Whether that's just your soul, your own, whatever that is, when we are cut off from ourselves and we are told we have to believe what someone else tells us is the truth, in order to be accepted and in order to be worthy and all of that, that's the biggest lie. And that's not just the Seventh-day Adventist Church's issue. That's the Christian church. Yeah.
That's what we've heard every episode. So
I just encourage people to question that and to really go within and to start trusting themselves and go on that journey of exploration.
That's a great message, Heidi, and a great way to end.
Yeah, I can't thank you enough. It's just an amazing story, and the courage for you to come on here and talk about it while you still have attachments to it is very brave of you. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me on. I'm just very, very, very grateful for both of you.
Thank you. We want to thank Heidi once again for coming on the show and for sharing her story and her deep history in the Seventh-day Adventist group. Such a unique opportunity for us to get somebody that was the third or fourth, I believe fourth generation out from somebody who actually started a cult and a group, back in the 1800s. That's a pretty big deal, Andrew.
And what blew me away was that it was a woman prophet. Yes. And that was her great grandmother. And all I know about history was that women didn't have any rights back then. Nevertheless, starting I don't think she started a cult, but she was a prophet, and she had these visions, and people were flocking to see what her vision. Of course, none of them came true, but just fascinating. So I would like her to come back if she can dissect the history in chronological and with more facts. And plus I think she said she's writing a book. So she's welcome back when she's ready.
Yes, absolutely. After she writes her book, we'd love to have her come back on. And she was very knowledgeable and gave us a lot of information and history of her actual cult that she was in. So that was greatly appreciated. And we thank Heidi once again. And we want to thank all of you for tuning into Cultimatum. As always, your support is greatly appreciated. If you could just take a moment to rate and review our podcast on platforms such as Apple and Spotify. And don't forget to follow, share, and keep listening to all of our latest episodes.
You can also show your support by joining our Facebook group under the name Cultimatum Podcast.
You can also find us on social media platforms, including Instagram, Pinterest, TikTok, and YouTube.
If you have a cult or human trafficking experience you'd like to share with us, please feel free to contact us at cultimatumpodcast@gmail.com.
And ex-cult members looking for any additional support can consider joining the Cult Escape and Recovery Support Group on Facebook.
And if you're interested in hearing more from me, you can find me on my other podcast, Anonymous Andrew, Life and the Choices We Make.
Stay safe, stay informed, and remember, you're not alone.